On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're welcoming in Big Blue View's Ed Valentine as we talk free agency, the draft, and Giants in general. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all our written work. And as always, welcome on into Blue Crew community members, newcomers, everydayers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, I'm happy to welcome in good friend Ed Valentine. What a way to end the week, a busy week, actually a quiet week, but the calm before the storm next week when free agency kicks in. Ed, welcome on in, friend.
Oh, nice to be here, Patty. This week's been calm. Then why am I exhausted?
Because you're getting old?
Well, all right then. All right. So here we go. All right.
Here we go. We're starting early, folks.
Yes, we are. We're starting early.
It wouldn't be a show with you, Ed, if there wasn't a little back and forth. But anyway.
Of course not.
Yeah. Anyway, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about the combine, which wrapped up earlier this week. Then we're going to transition to free agency, which starts next week. It's going to be a wild week, a lot of stuff for the Giants to do. Ed, I just want to start off with the combine, if I could, with you, and any impressions or feelings that you came away with from your excellent adventure, I think, as you call it.
I'm just glad nobody tried to fight me, Patty.
I know. I was worried about that. When I saw that, I said, "Oh boy!" And I know how you like your coffee, so
I actually went up there, looking for crime scene tape and all that kind of stuff, but nothing there.
Investigative reporting doesn't suit you, my friend. But anyway,
what can I tell you? I mean, it's just clear. I mean, it's hardly a revelation. When we were in Indy, that was still before the Matthew Stafford situation had resolved itself. And it was clear that people understood Joe Schoen was taking a big swing at quarterback. And I think even coming out of there, it's clear to everybody that Joe's going to continue to try to take a big swing at quarterback. For me, the biggest swing at quarterback, when we get into the draft, the biggest swing is moving up to 1 for Cam Ward. And it's just, it's a distinct possibility. And I don't think Joe has a choice but to make a big swing. But for me, that was the biggest impression, that I had, was that people understood, the place that Joe's in, and Joe understands the place that he's in too. That was pretty clear, because when we talked to Joe again and again and again and again, he referenced 2025 and the best quarterback for 2025, best player that can help us win this coming season. I don't recollect him, unless he was forced to, I don't recollect him talking about 2026 and beyond at all. So it's very, very clear that he understands the situation. Excuse me.
So with that said, at the end of last year, Joe sat there and he said, "I'm not going to take a Hail Mary. I'm not going to do something," basically saying, "I'm not going to do something out of desperation." You feel that has changed with him, or was it always there and he was just trying to downplay it?
No, I think it depends, Patty. I think it depends on what you consider a Hail Mary and what you consider desperation. I would have considered desperation to have been willing to part with the 3rd overall pick to get Matthew Stafford. And the impression, the understanding coming out of the combine was that neither the Giants nor the Raiders offered anything more than a third-round pick as trade compensation. So I would consider that a big swing, but I wouldn't consider it a Hail Mary.
Okay, but would a Hail Mary, given this team's needs, and they have a lot of them, would that be moving up to the number one pick and potentially having to give up next year's number one in the process?
And again, it comes down to degree, Patty. I think the big swing is required. I think that John Mara pretty much made that obvious in January. You know, he said the biggest priority, the biggest thing that has to happen this offseason is we have to have our quarterback of the future. And I'm sorry, that's not Aaron Rodgers. It's not Kirk Cousins. It's not Justin Fields. It's not Russell Wilson. You know, it's not Derek Carr if Carr comes available. So at some point, no matter who they sign next week in free agency, there has to be a quarterback drafted. For me, I would think, I don't know, I would almost consider it, you know, a trade up to get to number one to get Ward in itself is not really a Hail Mary because he's clearly the number one quarterback in the class, according to most analysts. Giving up the number one pick next year is probably a bridge too far for me. So you might put that in the Hail Mary category, but I think just about anything short of that number one pick is probably in the big swing category for me, but not necessarily a Hail Mary.
All right. And before we move on to talking about free agency, was there anything else that when you left Indianapolis, you came away with as far as what the Giants were thinking, what they might do, their thoughts on the prospects or anything like that?
Well, Joe didn't necessarily talk a lot about the prospects, but I do think that it's clear how he sees his offensive line. You know, he sees the offensive line as 4/5, not necessarily fixed, but 4/5 of the way to being okay. I think there's going to be a big swing in free agency at the guard spot. I really do. I think because that's the one he talked about over and over. Greg Van Roten did a nice job for the Giants last year, but he's 35 years old. He's a free agent. I think if he comes back next year, he's probably a swing guy, guard, center, swing, backup guy. But I think it was pretty clear, that they'll take a big swing, on the offensive line, on the interior.
So then that's kind of interesting because I know I thought or think, I still do think that they would maybe cross-train Evan Neal to play guard. So it just sounds like there's going to be no place for him on the starting offensive line because I can't imagine he would be ready, with just one offseason, not enough experience at that guard spot at this level.
Look, I don't want to go all Rich Eisen. You remember Rich Eisen last year coming out of the combine saying the Giants are done with Daniel Jones. They're just done with Daniel Jones.
He was right.
I think the Giants are done with Evan Neal. Honestly, I think they're done with Evan Neal. I had the impression talking to Joe that, I know that they've broached the topic of playing guard with Evan Neal. I don't know that they've said you're a guard, you're a tackle, you're whatever. I had the impression talking to Joe at the combine that Evan Neal was not front of mind. Let's put it that way. He's not front of mind. He's not being looked at as a guy they think is going to be part of their starting group in 2025. He's sort of an afterthought. I mean, Joe said, we'll figure that out after free agency, what position he might play. So honestly, I think the organization has basically just moved on from thinking that Evan Neal is going to be a major contributor.
I wonder if they don't consider packaging him up in a trade, which I could see, looking at history and the last time a team that was in the third overall spot in the draft traded up, you have to go back to 1975. And that particular trade actually included a player. It was the Falcons trading up with the Colts so that the Falcons could get quarterback Steve Wartkowski in that draft. So I wonder if, maybe if the Giants are looking to trade up with Tennessee, I think they need a tackle. I'm not sure, but maybe they say, look, Evan Neal's he's got talent. He just needs a fresh start. Maybe they can throw him in the deal to lessen the number of draft picks they have to give up.
Sure, and it might be easier for another team. You and I both know that Evan has been resistant, to say the least, to the idea of playing guard. It might be easier for another team, a team that didn't draft him, to say, look, this is where you're playing, period. We're going to move you inside. That's where your opportunity is going to be, and not have a fuss about it, not have an argument about it. So that wouldn't shock me either. But like I said, I just had the impression from Joe that they're kind of done with Evan.
All right, coming up next, we're going to talk free agency. That's going to be coming up. The free agency period starts next week, so we'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. The app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. Happy Friday to everybody. We're with Ed Valentine, a Big Blue View, and we just finished recapping a little bit from the combine, but we're going to turn our attention now to free agency, for lack of a better term, and I hate this term, but I'm going to use it anyway, the legal tampering period starts on Monday. The new league year starts on Wednesday. So, I found in the past that the most interesting part is those first 2 days before the start of the new league year, because then it's anticlimactic after that. But Ed, let me get your thoughts on the pending free agency. We mentioned quarterback in the last segment. Matthew Stafford's off the board, so to speak. Where do you see the Giants potentially going for that veteran bridge quarterback?
Oh, Patty, when the Aaron Rodgers stuff started, I don't know if you saw the thing that I posted at Big Blue View, but I did something that I rarely do in my writing. I reacted emotionally to the idea of the Giants signing Aaron Rodgers. And I don't want to have to stomach that possibility, to be honest with you. Yeah, he's the most talented quarterback out there, but he comes with so much baggage, and he comes with so many demands. I mean, in terms of how the offense is going to run and what players are going to come with him, and the Devontae Adams and Alan Lazards and who knows who else. And the other part about Rodgers, if we just want to focus on Rodgers for a second, is look, no matter who the Giants bring in, short of landing Stafford, which they failed to do, there isn't another quarterback available who takes them out of the market for the possibility of drafting somebody at 3 or higher. So whoever that quarterback is has to understand that he's coming into a situation where this isn't necessarily his team. He's a short-term solution. Not everything is going to be built around him. Not everything is going to be built for him. And there's going to come a point in time where he's probably going to have to step aside. And that point in time may well come, 2/3 of the way through the 2025 season. I don't know how Aaron Rodgers would handle that. I know he's been a good mentor to some young quarterbacks in the past, but None of those quarterbacks has ever been a threat to him. So I don't know. You look at, obviously, we're looking at Russell Wilson. You're looking at, people talk about Kirk Cousins. I don't think the Giants make the big swing on Sam Darnold. That's just too risky coming off Daniel Jones. People talk a lot about Kirk Cousins, and one red flag, one warning that I did learn in Indianapolis about Kirk Cousins is one of the issues that Atlanta had with him was he got his back up about the drafting of Michael Penix. And he went Brett Favre in that situation and said it wasn't in his contract to help this kid get ready to take his job. So if you're going to bring in Kirk Cousins to the Giants, he has to understand, that that's the situation where that's part of the expectation, and that eventually that kid's going to play. And Patty, as much as I hate it, I keep coming back to Russell Wilson. I keep coming back to Wilson because he's been a good mentor, because he's been through this situation a couple times already. It's a short-term kind of thing. And I think Russell Wilson might handle it better than a lot of the other bigger name veterans who are out there. So for me, that's probably the best solution, at quarterback. And again, I'm not thrilled with it because you've got to pair Russell Wilson with a Cam Ward or a Shedeur Sanders or somebody that you get in the first round, because he's not more than a 2025 bridge.
Right. And the other thing with Russell Wilson is you look at how the Steelers deployed him in the offense. Not exactly what I think Brian Daboll is looking to do in the long term, as far as like deep balls and vertical threats and all that stuff. That's really not part of Russell's game. And plus, some of Russell's mobility, I think, has fallen off a little bit as he's gotten older.
There is no perfect answer. There's no really good answer in free agency. And like we said, Rodgers is the most talented, but he comes with the most baggage. He comes with 2 years of embarrassment, with the Jets. And unless it's going to be a different version of Aaron Rodgers, just in terms of his approach and his attitude and his willingness, not to have to be catered to so much, then I have a hard time seeing how that would work.
Yeah, I don't see it working either. I think that might be a break glass in case of emergency type of fallback. I do think Russell Wilson probably makes the most sense for the Giants. They did flirt with him briefly last year, and because they wouldn't move off of this, Daniel's our starter once he's healthy. Well, if you're Russell Wilson and you want to compete for a chance for a job, no, who could blame him for, telling the Giants thanks, but no thanks and going elsewhere. So, yeah, I think Russell Wilson may make the most sense. There's been other suggestions. I know a couple of my readers said, well, why don't they just trade for Joe Milton? I'm like, I don't think the Giants would make two trades, a trade up for a quarterback and then a trade for a Joe Milton.
The other suggestion, the other thing that I've kicked around, Patty, and this is dependent on knowing that you can get up to number one or whatever and get Cam Ward. I look at, and I know what comes with him. I know I've called him Drew Lock on steroids because of the wild swings in his play. Jameis Winston paired with Cam Ward makes a lot of sense to me.
Yes.
For the simple reason that they are very similar type quarterbacks in terms of body type, arm strength, play style. You can run the identical offense with both players. You don't have to cater the offense to one quarterback versus the other quarterback. And Jameis Winston, for all of his ups and downs and wild swings in his career, Jameis Winston has been what Cam Ward is about to be, which is a top pick in the draft. And I think Jameis Winston might not be a great player, but he could be a really good mentor, for a guy like Cam Ward, if that's the direction the Giants want to go in.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. The more I think about it, yeah, Jameis Winston's going to turn the ball over. Maybe he'll drive you crazy, but it does make a lot of sense. Like you said, former first-round pick. He can help a first round pick coming in understand what it takes, especially if that first round's at quarterback. And the other thing is Winston's got a pretty strong arm, and he's played in a windy environment, in Cleveland, to
Yeah.
where now coming over to the Meadowlands,
Yeah.
which can be a wind tunnel, as you know, you got to have some arm strength. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm totally with you on that, and I would not hate that move for a year or two if that's what it took. All right, and in addition to quarterback, obviously we talked about offensive line, guard position. What about cornerback? That's a big glaring need for this team. I think they're going to take a swing in free agency. I've been pounding the table for DJ Reed. I don't think it's going to be DJ Reed, but I just have this fantasy, if you will. DJ Reed, a young defensive secondary, Deontay Banks, Tyler Newman, and then maybe a young safety, and they'd be set at that position or that position group for like the next several years.
Absolutely. Corner is a position where, look, there are some guys in the draft that you could look at on day 2, but it's also hard to look at day 2 and think, oh, you could get Jahdae Barron out of Texas, or Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, or I think it's Chavon Ravel out of East Carolina, any of those guys, because you might have to give up that 34th overall pick to go get your quarterback. I mean, that's just reality. If they go up to get Cam Ward, the 34th pick is going to have to be part of that deal. I look at that secondary, and they have to take a big swing at a corner. DJ Reed makes a lot of sense. Really good player. Familiar with New York, obviously. Familiar with Marquand Manuel, the Giants' new defensive backs coach, because they were together with the Jets. Charvarius Ward out of San Francisco is a guy that gets talked about a lot. Had a down year in 2024, but I think there were a lot of personal reasons attached to that. Patty, a dark horse for me that I don't think a lot of people have talked about is Paulson Adebo out of New Orleans, for the simple reason that I think he's only 25 or 26 years old, not really established as a number one corner in the league yet, but a guy who was coming into his own last year before he got hurt, guy that New Orleans was using as their number one corner. My understanding is he would be less costly than a couple of the other guys that are a little bit older. And if you want to take an upside swing, at a guy who might be coming into his prime, maybe it's a Debo. But if you want to just say we need a veteran mentor, then it's got to be, Ward or DJ Reed or Carlton Davis out of Detroit, one of those guys. So we'll see. But again, the other part of that is, even if you draft a corner on day 2, are you guaranteed to get a guy that can come in and be a number one guy? Probably not. So yeah. I think that's a spot they almost have to spend money on here next week.
Yeah, definitely. And Byron Murphy of Minnesota is another guy that I would look into.
I keep hearing that he's probably going back to Minnesota, but yeah, absolutely.
If he hits the market, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk sneaky needs if I could now. A sneaky need, I think, for this team, there's actually a couple. I'll start with wide receiver 2. Darius Slayton probably not going to be back. It sounds like he wants to move on, and he'll probably get a nice contract someplace that I don't think the Giants are going to want to match. Jalen Hyatt last year continues to be a mystery. I just don't know where they're going with him. They're going to need a second receiver, preferably a tall skyscraper type, to help with, taking some of the onus off of Malik Neighbors. Where do you see them maybe going in that direction?
Well, of course, that comes back to the Rodgers debate. If they sign Rodgers, does Rodgers bring Devontae Adams with him? I don't know. I'm not crazy about that idea. Since there's a relationship there with Brian Daboll, do you turn to Stephon Diggs for a year? Coming off the ACL. I'm not really sure, Patty, but there's another one out there on the market who I can't think of right now. I'm sure you're going to remind me here in a minute, but they have to go out and take a swing at a wide receiver too. And I think I think somebody off the free agent market is definitely the way to go here. I'm not crazy about the Diggs idea, but I wonder if the Giants would explore it for a year simply because of the relationship. So we'll see what happens. You have anybody else in mind at wide receiver?
Off the top of my head, no, I can't think of anybody, but I know I've got a list that I've started working on. So
yeah, as do I, and it's not in front of me, and my
Yeah.
aging brain is dumping the names out as we speak. So
Well, actually, before I get to the other sneaky needs, you brought up a point I want to ask you. This is more of a big picture question, and that is the Giants last year were, I think, the second youngest team on opening day. If you're retweaking this team, which obviously it needs to be done, do you want to have more guys who are a little bit older? Do you want to stay with the youth and just develop them? Again, based on where this team is and the pressures of that are on Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, what's the best approach?
Patty, that's the hard part of where the Giants are. And that's the hard part of the decision to bring Joe and Brian Daboll back, because you put them in a situation where 2025 takes on, immense importance. And yet at heart, this is still a long-term build. There's a long way to go. So there are going to be some short-term, short-sighted moves that are made here. But one of the things that I remember, and I can't remember who I was talking to about this. It might have actually been our friend Jonathan Casillas. And one of the things that he said, we've talked a lot about the idea that the Giants have lost a lot of leadership over the last couple of years. And one of the things that we talked about was this idea that every room should have a veteran in it that has had a decent amount of success, that is willing to help and willing to mentor, and willing to, even Malik Neighbors talked about this last year. Malik Neighbors talked about wanting more veteran leadership on this team. I mean, he pointed to Darius Slayton having helped him learn a routine of maintenance for his body. And, he even talked about the idea of needing more guys that can help the young players really understand, how to prepare and how to maintain their bodies and what the NFL is. So for me, I think you don't want, you don't want a whole bunch of 35-year-old guys.
Right.
But if you can bring in some experienced players who can still help you on the field, who's the linebacker that the Washington Commanders brought in last year, that had been in Seattle for a long time?
Wagner?
Yes. Not a lot left in the tank, but a guy that could really help a young team develop. If you can add a couple of pieces like this that are leadership type guys that are willing to really mentor, and share what they know, if you can do that, great. I think this team could really use that. But overall, I think they still have to stay on the path of staying as young as they can, because that's the best thing for their future. But again, it's a hard thing because of you've put Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll in a 1-year situation. Yeah,
definitely. All right. And before I let you go, I want to get to a couple more sneaky needs, and I won't even go into the depth spots like tight end, running back, but sneaky needs, in my opinion, on the defense. Edge rusher. If they don't retain Azeez Ojulari, which I don't think they will, they're going to probably want to get another edge rusher. I've mentioned Chase Young as a possibility. Joey Bosa just became available. I don't know if he would be, and I know Chase Young and Bosa, they've had some injury history issues, but they're still relatively young. And there's some I think there's some juice left in the tank, but where do you see them maybe going in terms of edge rusher, assuming that you think that that's a need as well?
I do believe it's a need, Patty. Um, the thing of it is, I can't see a big dollar swing in free agency, on the edge, not with the money that they're already paying, Brian Burns and paying Kayvon Thibodeau. Um, my guess would be the draft, unless you're able to find a moderately priced, guy to come in as the third edge rusher in free agency. And maybe you do both. Maybe you sign that moderately priced guy. Maybe it's a guy like we're talking about, a guy that's a little bit longer in the tooth, but could help mentor guys on the defensive side of the ball. And then you draft somebody in the middle as well. But absolutely, because you can't go into the season with Patrick Johnson and Tomon Fox as your backup edge defenders. You just can't do it.
Yeah, I agree. And then Ed, the other sneaky need for me, safety. Jason
Absolutely.
Pinnock. Jason Pinnock probably won't be back, and they can quite honestly upgrade that spot because I question if Pinnock was really a good fit for what Shane Bowen did. There's some looks like it's going to be a decent free agent safety market. I know Javon Holland is probably going to be the top guy, but he's going to cost. And they didn't spend on Xavier McKinney last year. Might they change their mind and say, you know what, we might have to spend on a veteran to get that secondary up where we need it to be?
Patty, Javon Holland is a swing that I can't see Joe taking. I just can't. I can see Joe being willing to change some of his cap management attitude. I mean, Joe realizes that the Giants were one of only two teams currently that don't have any contracts with void years attached to them at all. And Joe, I think, understands, and he has to understand, look, he's playing in a division where he's chasing the Super Bowl champions. And he's not only chasing the Super Bowl champions, he's chasing the general manager who handles those void years and spreading money out better than anybody. He's more aggressive with that than anybody. And if you're not willing to use that tool, then you're leaving yourself behind. If you're not willing, because Howie Roseman has this right, Patty. The cap is exploding so much every year that those dollars that you push into the future cost far less in the future than they actually would cost today. So you're leaving yourself in a situation where you simply can't bring in as much talent if you won't use them. So that's where I think Joe might change, and we'll find that out next week. But I don't think his lean toward positional value is going to change. So I can't see a big dollar swing at safety, but I don't even consider safety a sneaky need. I consider it an upfront need because I think we've seen enough of Dane Belton to know that Dane Belton's not the answer either. So there's definitely a need there, but I don't see Joe spending big dollars to try to fix it.
Right. And by the way, your point on the voidable years, I have an article coming out about that very same topic and how I don't understand why they haven't used it more. I call I say Howie Roseman is like, he puts on a masterclass every year and you just study what he does. And it's like, why aren't more teams doing it, especially the Giants? So
I guess I understood it early in Joe's tenure. Okay. When he was trying to dig the Giants out from the financial mess that he was in, but it's not early in Joe's tenure anymore.
No,
it's not early in Joe's tenure. And I'll be honest, shame on Joe if he leaves talent off the roster because he won't manipulate the cap to make sure that he can bring it to that he can bring a player or two in. Because if you push whatever dollar amount it is, if you push 2 or 3 years down the road with voidable years, that $10 million is going to look like $6 million in 3 years. So, Howie Roseman calls them interest-free loans. I
Right.
think is what he calls them. If it was a hard cap that stayed the same every year, then I would get you'll pay the piper eventually argument.
Mhm.
But the way the cap is exploding, do you ever really end up paying the piper?
No.
Probably not. So
No.
push the money off.
Right.
And bring in some extra talent.
Right. And plus you have the fact that they're probably going to go to an 18-game schedule by at least 2028, if not sooner. They're going to have you've got Netflix bidding on getting a game. That's all new revenue that's going to be coming in. So you're absolutely right. And that philosophy of, interest-free loan, you're right. A 10 million cap hit today is probably going to be half of that in 2 or 3 years. So I don't understand why they wouldn't use that. And I hope that Joe does use that because, I know when I make up my contracts, my guesses at contracts for free agents, I use that mechanism all the time.
Absolutely. I think you have to. There are a couple of off-season sort of cap managers, roster managers that you can play around with. And I think one of them, it might be at Pro Football Network, one of them where you can sign your own free agents and restructure your own contracts and all of that, allows you to actually use the void years and play around with contracts that way. So that's kind of fun to do.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Ed, appreciate you coming on. Always good to have you on. Get some sleep, get some rest this weekend. Go play golf because next weekend, if you're like me, you're probably not going to leave the house and you're probably going to be putting in double hours with the start of free agency next Monday. So
Absolutely. Tied to the laptop, Patty. Tied to the laptop, tied to the phone.
it's so funny. It's like, okay, make sure you got lots of coffee to take care of all your stuff. Say goodbye to your wife because you probably won't see her for a couple of days at least,
Pretty much.
Yep. All
All
right.
right.
Well, rest up, my friend. Thank you again for coming on. Giant fans, thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Be sure to keep it here all next week. And as news breaks, we will have video shorts, we'll have reactions, grades, all that stuff as the Giants begin free agency, as the NFL begins free agency, the new league year starting on Wednesday, but free agency, the pre-negotiation period on Monday. Giant fans, we will see you then. Have a great weekend, everybody.